Good morning and welcome to this Thursday, April 11th, 2024, 9:30 a.m. decision-making hearing in conference room 229 at the Capitol. This is a reconvening of this committee's confirmation hearing for Governor's Message 705, Colin Yost, for consideration and reconfirmation to the Public Utilities Commission for a term to expire June 30, 2028. To June 30, 2030, I'm sorry, as amended in GM 733. But again, this is a reappointment. This committee heard testimony on the nominee in a prior scheduled hearing last week. Because of time constraints and the request for members to complete their question and answer of the nominee, we elected to reconvene this hearing and ask more questions. So why don't we begin by offering the nominee a chance to come up. We did send a list of follow-up questions on behalf of members who we were not able to accommodate with time to ask questions because we ran out of time last week. We sent those questions to the nominee. So maybe just to start and get those out of the way, Mr. Yost, if you can just make a brief statement, and then you can reply however you see fit to what was submitted.
All right. Thank you, Chair Kiokolole, Vice Chair Fukunaga, members of the committee. My name is Colin Yost. I'm here, as you know, for reconfirmation to the PUC. Just brief opening statement. I want to reiterate and emphasize that at this time, the Public Utilities Commission's highest priority is the safety and reliability of Hawaii's electric grids. The PUC is actively supporting, right now, infrastructure upgrades and future upgrades. We're also supporting bringing new generation online as quickly as possible in all of the HECO territories. In all of our work, the PUC understands that our fundamental duty is to serve the public interest as an independent and objective regulator. That is our fundamental duty. I can respond to a few of the questions. There were quite a few, Chair. If you don't mind if I just hit a few high points, and then if you want to follow up. One key question was, since the CPN hearing on the resolution, the Senate resolution relating to the PUC's wildfire investigation, what is the PUC doing to follow up? And this resolution is currently being considered by the House, and we've updated our testimony to explain what we're doing. And I'm just going to read that very brief paragraph into the record so that you're aware of it as well. The Commission is currently scoping the next phases of its investigations, including exploring what a docketed proceeding may cover and how it may best be structured. The Commission anticipates this will include further investigation into the cause of the fire to the extent that this can be determined within the Commission's expertise, and also any contributing issues related to the utility's grid infrastructure and operations. So that we're currently engaged in that process of scoping, and we are planning a next phase of our investigations. Another key question is, what are we doing about the rolling blackouts on Hawaii Island? The reliability issues there are most extreme of any of the HECO territories or any throughout the state. So the Commission established an internal multidisciplinary team that's led by our chief engineer to investigate these outages, and we are also modernizing our outage and accident reporting procedures to ensure timely and effective notifications from the utilities. In the past, we haven't required as much depth and specificity from the utilities when an outage happens or when there's an accident. We noticed this pretty quickly after more issues started arising and we started looking at the information we were receiving. It clearly was very high level and didn't, required us to then immediately start asking a whole bunch of follow-up questions. So we're modernizing those forms to require the utility upfront to give us a lot more information so we don't have to chase it. We want to be on the front end of understanding why things are not going the way they're supposed to go. We also are requiring HELCO to submit a detailed plan outlining all mitigation measures it is pursuing in the near and longer term, such as increased demand response, revising unit maintenance schedules, ramping up generation from other units, deploying additional generators or batteries across the island, and other measures. And we are continuing to push HELCO and HECO generally to be continuously better at messaging to the public, communication with the public, so that people understand what's going on. We also are very mindful of the fact that HEP is an affiliate of HELCO, and so we are applying extra scrutiny to HECO's own or HELCO's own negotiations and communications with HEP regarding whether or not they are doing everything possible to get the Hamakua unit up and running as fast as possible and in the most reliable and cost-effective way. So we are applying extra scrutiny because of that affiliate relationship. Another key question, what will the Commission do differently to ensure that projects that are approved by the Commission are in fact delivered in a timely way? So the IGP RFP process, last time I misspoke, I was thinking of an earlier cycle for that planned process. I thought it was going to come in 18-month cycles. Actually, it's 14 months, so it's even faster than I thought it was, which is a key measure of improvement, we think, in terms of getting projects into the cycle, into the queue faster for approval and interconnection. We're also doing improved equity and communication acceptance criteria and improved processes for bidders. This is in the IGP RFP, and projects for interconnection, such as pre-bid developer meetings, required early interconnection engineering, a new interconnection website that provides more transparency from the utility to the potential developers so they understand where it's going to be easier to interconnect, and streamlining technical requirements and data submission. So we do hope that RGP3, we think actually is a lot better than the first two stages of 1 and 2, especially in terms of potential delays that happened when everything was approved and it was all good from a contract PPA standpoint, but the interconnection cost was not yet understood. And so what would happen is they would come in stage 1 and 2 to the PUC, get approval for that project to proceed. And then in a number of cases, HECO finished its interconnection cost review, and it turned out to be a lot higher than what the developers expected. And that created a whole bunch of issues and problems. So here we're requiring that process of determining interconnection costs to happen simultaneous with PUC approval. So it's all one process. We're not going to have a big surprise happen after the PUC approves it. And that was the benefit of RGP3, but there's a bunch of other things we're trying to add on in the IGP RFP process. We're also going to continue our monitoring of projects and interconnection incentive measures that we have through our performance-based rate-making structure to try to make sure that we've got adequate incentives in place to get these projects interconnected in a timely way and not to have unexpected delays happen because of us or because of the utility's actions. We can't control things like supply chains, we can't control things like pandemics, but there are a lot of things we can control and we can improve. So we are working in all of those areas. I think there was one other correction, there was kind of an assumption made in one of the questions that in one legislative measure, we were asking for a 90-day review following the last, if I could just actually get to the, this is SB 2997 and SB 2901. The question was relating to, why is the PUC seeking to fast-track securitization? Why are we seeking a 90-day timeline for review when the initial measure was promoting a 180-day timeline? And I think there's a little misunderstanding there that I wanted to clear up. It's my understanding the measure was seeking 180 days for the entire docket relating to the securitization review. And that would include PUC decision-making. A normal docket normally takes significantly longer than 180 days to go from start to finish. There are reasons for that. There's due process. There are interested stakeholders who have a right, in many cases, to intervene, to participate in PUC dockets. We need to have a complete record before us before we can make the right decision. So what we were saying is we didn't want to put a limit necessarily on how long that process should take, because there are certain legal reasons why it may take a little longer than 180 days, even just that part. So it's actually what we're proposing is not a fast track at all, but the opposite. We want the docket process to proceed on securitization in a normal, deliberative manner and give us the chance to ask questions during that process as well and make sure we're satisfied that the record is complete. And then, once that normal docket process is done, we want 90 days to do our evaluation of that record and issue the best decision possible. That 90-day period is holding our feet to the fire a little bit. Like, that's not always the case that the PUC reaches a decision after the completion of a record within 90 days, but we want to be sure that there is an endpoint that for certainty that, that we will actually render a decision and give the utility and the public our final determination of those matters in a timely manner. Like, we may not need 90 days, frankly. On an issue like that, if the record is complete, if the issues are clear, then we would seek to do it faster. But that's what that relates to. It's not actually a fast track. It's just a commitment by the PUC to render a timely decision once the record is complete. And Chair, I think those are the main high points I wanted to hit. I'm happy, though, to talk about any of the other questions that were raised in writing.
Okay, thank you very much for that. Members, questions? Senator McKelvey.
No, I'm just.
Yeah, actually,
Senator Richards.
Yeah.
okay, thank you. Big Island. And you and I have actually been discussing this for some time now. Striking the balance between our evolution away from fossil fuel. And I think sometimes we push the envelope a little hard on that, and we're not quite ready for it, as was proven this last 3 or 4 months, where all of our renewables were impacted just because of Mother Nature. The wind didn't blow, the sun high overcast. So in looking at that from your perspective, as we step forward, is that going to retool the thinking of PUC as we strive for the 100% renewable? Comments on that, please.
So yes, I mean, as you and I have discussed before, I think we need to be very careful about ensuring that when we're retiring resources, we have adequate replacement resources already online and ready to go. I think that's critical to do that. That's one issue. With Hamakua is a firm thermal resource.
Supposed to be.
And it actually represents the entire reserve margin of the island of Hawaii. There is no good reason for it to be down.
Mm-hmm.
Like, its failure to operate is a failure of the operational activity of HEP, right? It's a clear failure. Exactly the cause of that failure is still being investigated. They have an independent engineer involved that is working on it. We are going to exercise oversight over that work of the independent engineer and see whether we agree with, I'm not sure if it's a he or her, with his or her conclusions. The report was supposed to come in on 31st of March from the independent engineer. It did not, because new revelations came up regarding what was happening there, and actually things got worse, right? They thought initially it was something they could fix in a relatively short period of time, and then they realized, no, they can't. Both of their main engines are down and may require a complete replacement. It appears they will. So we've got to make sure that process plays out. So that's a little bit of a separate issue in that sense, but the RFP, actually this gives me the opportunity, if it's okay, to clear up another sort of misunderstanding from another question. The question was asking, are we okay with HELCO proposing 150% of what it needs in an RFP, and whether we just approve that and essentially saddle the ratepayers with extra expense from excess generation, hypothetically. So I wanted to be clear that 150% is in the solicitation stage of the RFP. It's not what would come to the PUC for approval. HECO or HELCO, all of them, were having issues with seeking solicitations for bids and then having people drop out even in that early stage, so that when they got to the negotiation part, you got solicitation and then selection of bids and negotiation of PPAs, and then submission of applications to the PUC for approval. So even in that early stage before it got to the PUC, projects were dropping out, and they wouldn't necessarily have even 100% of what they were hoping to have to submit to the PUC for approval. So that was the good thing. The 150% was a good thing because they were front loading at least the potential of what they could bring to us, so that it reduced the possibility of not having enough by the time they got to PUC approval time. There is still a risk, obviously, that projects could drop out after they're submitted to the PUC for approval, and that will be in part on us, in part on the utility, in part on a lot of other parts of government to seek ways to streamline that development process, try to reduce it from 5 years to 3 years, and do whatever else is necessary to responsibly and cost-effectively interconnect those new projects. But yes, we've got to bring more generation online as quickly as possible. Clearly, relying entirely on Hamakua for a reserve margin and having it fail in this kind of spectacular fashion was a mistake. Like, there should be a more diverse mix of resources that don't have that potential to all fail in that manner and leave the island so short of power at a time when it needs it. So we've got to work with the utilities to improve that.
And I agree, it's a balance. When you talk about front loading 150%, that extra 50% means absolutely nothing until it means everything. And there's a cost assigned to it. So finding that balance, you're charged with making sure that it's fair and equitable, the product that's being delivered, the electricity, at a reasonable cost. But if we have a lot of standby power, that increases your cost, and we're not going to use it until we need it. And so, I appreciate what you're saying is that this is part of the thought process as we're going through. So thank you.
Absolutely, yes.
Thank you, Chair.
Members, any?
Oh, no, actually, you know what?
No, please.
No, you first.
Senator Lee.
Thanks again for taking the time. I want to follow up. I just walked in at the very end of, I think, the prior question, which I heard the beginning of as I was leaving my office, regarding the timeline for PUC review from 90 days, 180 days, and all of that. And forgive me for not hearing the whole thing, but I think part of the concern raised was PUC having limited real capacity to go through what would be a major evaluation and docket in that period, particularly on something that's potentially game-changing for the next few decades for ratepayers in Hawaii. Looking at California and some of the other states that have gone through similar processes, I mean, you had utilities like PG&E and SDG&E that were caught in very similar circumstances, declared bankruptcy. California put in place mechanisms for securitization and other access to capital and things like that. But fast forward now a couple of years in both those cases, and PG&E just had its most profitable year, I think, ever for shareholders, which is great for them. SDG&E just had its most profitable 2 years, I believe. Meanwhile, ratepayers are now paying $30+ a month more in some of those service territories than they ever did before. It would seem that that's something that clearly California's got some regret over, given the results. I think the concern here is that even on a really short timeline that is being proposed by the PUC, that we could potentially end up in the same situation. So how do we ensure that the PUC not only has the right capacity to evaluate all this stuff, as well as timeline to make sure that we don't end up in the same situation?
You may or may not have heard the part of the discussion on that issue where I was explaining that our position is the initial creation of the record in that matter. We're not seeking a time frame on that. It could take as long as it takes to make the record complete for decision making. And part of that, so more than 180 days, right? Likely, in an issue as complex as that. And part of that process of creating the record is the PUC staff and sometimes even the commissioners engaging in questions and investigation relating to issues that are relevant to the docket at hand. And by the time we get to the final filings of the parties in any normal docket, we've done all of that work, right? We've taken the time and the effort to also build out the record that we think we need. And if we're not being given complete information by the parties, we will seek to develop that record ourselves. Like, that is our responsibility, to supplement and make the record as complete as possible. We can even bring in outside experts. We can hire consultants or others and make them part of the docket, have their testimony and their information supplement the record, and that's within our purview. So we would make sure that the docket is complete and ready for decision making, and by the time those final statements of position and other final papers are filed by the parties and the participants, we will have enough information to make a decision within 90 days. We feel pretty confident about that. But it is on us, again, to make sure that we're involved very actively in the creation of that record prior to the moment where it is, quote unquote, ready for decision making. We just don't want it to be an interminable time frame after the record is at that point where it really is ready. We want to create some certainty for the public and for the utilities, and frankly, for the credit rating agencies and everyone else who will be watching that type of docket very closely, that the PUC will take prompt action to make a decision and move the whole matter forward. It's not something that we'd want to have left out in purgatory that could or could not be decided on within a specified period of time. We want to be a little clearer about that in this instance.
Thanks. And Chair, if I could have one follow-up. Just on that, part of that whole process that PUC goes through, you have authority that's given to you to do certain things, right? And within a certain scope of jurisdiction and so forth. Part of the challenge, I think, that other places have realized when they're going through these kinds of large scale kind of, how do we deal with all these different risk profiles and so forth, is you end up with what is ultimately ratepayers being asked to pay more through securitization or some other similar kind of mechanism, or taxpayers directly subsidizing infrastructure or whatever you want to call it. But if we're asking ratepayers to subsidize infrastructure or additional infrastructure, that we're on the legislative side empowering you guys to authorize and review and vet and then approve, in addition to all the normal stuff that we're doing for basic maintenance and resiliency and whatever. But in the case of going that extra mile to provide that access to capital, which could be hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars over the long term, would it make sense to protect ratepayers by ensuring that those funds provided to the utility to go forth and do more right now would not belong to the utility itself, but that CapEx investment would belong to the public, so that the public actually has direct ownership of that additional cost that we're asking them to bear?
I don't think that's the way the proposed measure is currently structured, if I'm correct.
I'm just asking in a
but
conceptual...
I feel a little, I understand the point and the concept, and I'm personally generally very much in favor of empowering the public in every context possible, right? But I don't know that I can sit here and tell you whether that should be passed into law or whether the law should be revised that's currently being proposed. The PUC has reacted to the measure that the legislature has put forward and provided its feedback as to what we think about it. In the context that the legislature has presented, the PUC thinks that securitization conceptually is a useful mechanism. We aren't committing to say yes to securitization. If it came before us in a docket, we have a duty to independently and objectively evaluate that request, that application from the utility, to see whether it is actually in the public interest and to see whether the specific calculation of cost and the way that it's structured is appropriate. And that's our duty in every single application that comes before us on any matter, right? We also, in an overarching way, know that our electric bills are too high, and we are urgently trying to figure out every way we can to push it in the opposite direction and bring those costs down. So whenever we're being asked to add extra cost to a ratepayer's bill, that automatically, causes us to apply extra scrutiny to what's being asked. Is this really necessary? What are the benefits of this application? In this case, securitization, we'd have to really carefully look at, in that specific request, whether the benefits outweigh the cost, right? And so if there are urgent things that need to be done to upgrade the grid and protect public safety, and securitization is the only mechanism available to make that happen, then that would be the type of reason why it might be justified to add cost to the bill. Sorry, I didn't mean to go on too long.
Just what I'm getting at is the difference between, for example, if we're providing authorization to recover funds for resiliency or wildfire mitigation, whatever it is, as imagined through securitization, that would mean one process through the PUC. If we're providing, for example, direct funding, like through a different mechanism, as has been proposed in some drafts along the way, that would potentially be vetted by the PUC, but not require cost recovery on the shareholder side, for example. So in other words, we're asking the public to pay for this one way or another to make sure that we have a functioning electric grid for the future that's resilient and probably, hopefully, will avoid the next Lahaina type disaster. But if we do that, can we do it more cheaply if, for example, we're not allowing cost recovery for that extra $100 million or several $100 million or $1 billion down the road by ensuring that it belongs to ratepayers themselves if they're paying for it? And if the PUC is given that authority.
Right. I leave it up to the wisdom of the legislature to decide on the structure of what you want us to do. I can tell you that whatever you ask us to do, we prefer to be the final gatekeeper. We'd like to have a role of examining the specific request and figuring out whether or not it's in the public interest and whether or not the cost that's being proposed is justified. So whatever the structure is, I'd like that to stay in place. And then aside from that, I feel like it's not really my place to advise or try to seek to promote one structure.
Sure, I appreciate that. I just like to stir the pot.
That's okay.
Throw that out there for consideration.
That's
Thanks,
totally
Chair.
fine. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Senator McKelvey.
Yeah, just to keep it brief, just a couple questions. I just want your comments. It's more of just a comment. I've had some concerns about the securitization bill, and one of them was the immunity clause that's in there. I think it's on page 43, lines 11 through 14, which is huge blanket immunity. It sounds like reading this, that if you say had a telephone pole that was full of termites and it collapsed and caused this thing, damages, that they would be absolved. So I guess from the PUC's perspective, if there's a finding of fault or something happens, and given this, who would be the responsible entity for trying to ensure that these families or affected businesses are made whole? Where would the buck stop, for lack of a better term?
Well, I believe our testimony, the PUC's testimony on that issue of immunity, we opposed it. We did not think that was a good idea, and that's what our testimony consistently said. So beyond that, if you had it in there, I don't know the answer to your question.
Well, I mean, any of the states granted this kind of level of immunity at all? Would Hawaii be the first, I guess?
I don't know the answer to that question. I know in California, you've got that totally different structure related to the safety certification that happens on an annual basis, and that if the utility qualifies for that safety certification, then they have access to the wildfire mitigation fund in the event of some kind of tragedy. But there's also inverse condemnation in California, so it's a different animal. We don't have that yet here in Hawaii. The courts haven't ruled on it. That concept is not in Hawaii law right now.
Yeah. And then final thing, this has been like a theoretical conversation, forgive me, Chair, has been, you know, with the push for renewable energies, many of them are intermittent, but they're becoming firm because of batteries. But battery production is, first of all, highly toxic materials. Let's face it, a lot of it comes from Africa, where the people who are extracting it is pretty much slave child labor. A lot of it's being done through the Belt and Road Initiative. And then there's what happens to the batteries when they reach end of life or in the fire. We discovered they became IEDs almost. I guess, is the PUC looking forward as an entity, or do you see it looking forward and trying to address the issues of we have so much batteries being used to create firm out of intermittent? Are we working ourselves into a hole? Are we creating more environmental problems? Should we be trying to push for other technological solutions other than the traditional battery? And should we try to be bringing in more intermittent, firmer renewables because of the fact that we have this kind of battery backup on so many intermittent? Just your thoughts on the battery side of things.
Sure. Yeah, I agree with you on your points on batteries. Batteries are, in their current form, I view them as being very primitive compared to what we're likely to have even 5 years from now. There are a lot of work going on all over the world and in the U.S. too on improving the chemistry of those things to make them less toxic, making them more long duration, and then also just pivoting back perhaps to more traditional ideas of pump storage, hydro, or things like that don't require all those toxicity, but do potentially have other environmental impacts that need to be considered. But there's a lot of development there, and I think part of the challenge for us and for the utility is that we've got to do something quickly to improve reliability and to improve this transition process. But we can't necessarily sit and wait for the perfect solution to show up.
No, yeah.
Right? That might be cold fusion, but that'd be 20 years from now, right? So maybe. So we have to kind of do the best we can with what we've got, and then not hopefully become completely committed to any one technology, but to maintain a diverse range of resource alternatives and diverse mix. And there may be a period of time, and we've been advised by this from HNEI, the Hawaii Natural Energy Institute, that we're going to have to, perhaps for some period of time, have a few more resources on our grid than we would normally have a little more reserve than we would normally have. And that may be part of our transition process, to make sure that we've got enough.
Intermittent reserve, though, right?
Sure, like
So you have
all
more
different
batteries.
kinds of
I mean, for
reserve,
me,
yeah.
I guess the thing is that I would think the PUC would say, okay, we're pushing you for your PPAs to look at new technologies, but also to look at the fact is what is your disposal plan?
Yeah.
And it does create an additional fire risk.
Yes.
And you have all of these intermittents in
Yes.
rural areas with batteries everywhere. And we saw what happened with the electric cars in Lahaina. I mean, so I just, hopefully the PUC will start to try to move forward. And this is an important conversation as we push to more intermittent renewables.
I completely agree. Those are all good points.
Thank you, Chair, for allowing me to go down that battery road.
Of course. Members, questions? Senator Richards.
Thank you, Chair. Triggered a few conversations. First of all, you talked about communication on this. And the PUC, a little bit of a black hole. Things go in and then silence. And then a long time elapses and then something may show up. As we're managing through all this stuff, I've pushed Helco on the Big Island about communicating. If we have an outage coming, let's get the information out. And I think the community, the public, is far more accepting if they know something's coming, or if there's something happened, what happened? And then what can we look? And I do agree with you that I think the PUC should be the gatekeeper when it comes to making these decisions and the final evaluation. But I think communication has to be part of that, and timely communication, not a black hole. So having our power grid communicate, but it's also having the PUC communicate as well. Comments on that?
I agree, and one of the things in talking with my fellow commissioners, like if we could do something differently, we do a number of things differently always. When you look back, you always realize there are things you could improve, right? But one important thing is that we should have said, right when we started our investigation of the wildfires, we should have said that publicly. You know, we should have issued a press release and said, the PUC is launching an investigation. Here's what that investigation looks like. Here's what we're doing. Here's what the end point of it is going to look like, or the midpoint or whatever, to give a better sense to the public that we're not sitting on our hands, which we have never been sitting on our hands. I've tried to make that clear. But we also are developing internally a division of public engagement, and we hired a new woman to help run that, to help organize that. So it's kind of part of our compliance section, which is the section that takes in public complaints, consumer complaints, and then seeks to solve them individually. But they don't do a lot of general public education or general public communication. So we are seeking to develop a better division of public engagement internally that will then make us more transparent, more engaged. The equity docket is another effort that we're doing to make us less obtuse, more accessible, to not have, you don't have to be an attorney necessarily to come talk to us to get information into the record. And that's always been true through the public comment process. People can always submit public comments, and they can do it on a napkin if they want to, you know, and we'll scan it into the electronic system. But that's not part of the record, right? The public comments aren't part of the record. So we do look at them though, and we pay attention to them, and we may sometimes even quote them in our orders. But we want not just public comments, we want people to feel like if they've got a real stake in something, that they have an opportunity and a clear path to come be part of the process and get information into the record that's officially part of our decision-making process. So we are seeking to improve, and we've got work to do.
Okay, just communication, I think we can allay public fears and concerns if we just tell them something. Even if we're just telling them, we expect a report by the end of the month, there's been a delay, it'll be 2 weeks later.
Yeah. We also lost our communications officer for a period of time to the Army Reserve during that critical time after the fire, and for 4 or 5 months after. So she just came back to us just at the beginning of the year, and we're very grateful to have her back. She's already made a lot of difference in terms of us starting to communicate a little better.
Okay, thank you, Chair.
Members, questions? Senator McKelvey.
Sorry, really appreciate the indulgence, Chair. I just want to touch upon a conversation started last hearing. You and I have talked about it. It's kind of a dynamic structural one, which is the role of the PUC. And you mentioned it here, and I appreciate it. You know, I believe the role of the PUC has to maintain a regulatory independence. It's a regulator. Like my friend from Maui says, it plays defense. But clearly there's a need and a frustration and a desire for there to be to play offense in the energy area, which has been identified as the State Energy Office, right? How do you see your role, defense office with the State Energy Office? Should they be more proactive, more PUC-like on trying to align some of these things from the offensive side? And are there areas that the PUC could, for lack of a better word, play offense, but not overstep or dilute its regulatory integrity?
I think that we've been already talking to the Energy Office about this quite a bit, actually. How do we better integrate the work that they're doing into the record, into the dockets, and how do we get that information to us more successfully, more consistently? Last time I sat here before you last week, I actually didn't know that the Energy Office is getting close to completing a alternative fuel cost-benefit analysis report. That's coming later in the middle of this year, is my understanding. They're going to look at all the different sorts of firm alternative fuels beyond oil, right? A lot of different types of things, and try to give a comprehensive view of what's better for the state. And I don't know exactly what will be in that report, but it's the kind of thing that absolutely should be integrated.
It's critical that they're
into the
communicating this to you guys, right?
Yeah,
They're
well,
creating
it was communicated to some parts of the PUC, just not to me, right? I'm not at the point. My role at the PUC is mostly to work with our Office of Research and Planning on their own, work.
But that's a silo too, right?
It is a little bit. We kind of divide and conquer a little bit in terms of the 3 commissioners at the PUC in terms of how we try to manage things. But I mean, our chair is the person on point for the high-level stuff of government interagency interaction, and that's appropriate. That's the role of the chair, right? To do that, to be the legislative liaison, to be the budgetary liaison. I mean, that is the responsibility of the chair position within the PUC. So I don't know everything that he knows all the time, right? And that wouldn't be possible, but I was told about this shortly after that hearing last week, and I'm glad that that's coming. But we've also then had more conversations, and I've had more conversations about how do we make it clearer to the public what is being thought about, what is being proposed, what alternatives beyond the utility IGP, the integrated grid plan. What does the state think about that, right? What do we like about it? What do we not like about it? When we got that plan, we did not approve the plan, in part because it's constantly in flux, really, but we accepted it as a credible effort in response to their obligation to produce such a plan, right? But that's not saying that we're pre-approving anything or that we're saying that it's all good and we can just stop planning. That's not the way it works. But we really do need to integrate more of the state's own view of how we improve our transition, how we improve reliability, safety, everything into our work.
An independent planner, an independent to meet our energy goal needs policy-wise, and maybe a conduit, and I'm guilty of this, of legislatively opening dockets for things like undergrounding, right? If the energy office is taking a look at, this area proactively as part of this thing, and to present things to the PUC, that could possibly be a benefit to the PUC.
Absolutely, and I think we will see closer collaboration between our agencies and between others as well within state government. I think going forward, we need more of that public viewpoint coming into our process to give us more information to help us make better decisions.
Thank you, Chair. Appreciate it.
Well, I'd like to ask a follow-up on that because Senator Richards' question and Senator McKelvey's question and the discussion last week brought up this, to me, this balance that needs to be struck between the PUC's necessary posture as a regulator, as a neutral arbiter that's tasked with enforcing the law and executing on the law, but also these clear desires by the legislature and the public as well, and the public through the legislature for better communication and proactivity so that we understand what the neutral arbiter is doing and that we have some assurance that the neutral arbiter is doing what they're supposed to or doing anything at all. And the legislature, the senator next to me is not the only one. We field many measures that propose that the PUC take on a more proactive role. And so for you, a lot of what you have said so far seems to be in agreement with many of the things the legislature is asking the PUC to do, but there has got to be a line somewhere, and I'm wondering for you where it is. Not only I have a later question about procedure, but there's got to be a line somewhere where you have to tell us or members of the public, or importantly, the utilities themselves, no, because in order to maintain our standing as a regulator, we cannot cross into that. We can't cross the line. So how do you think about that, and what is the line?
Well, one maybe simple example would be HECO has come to us to request an AR credit facility for $250 million, using some of its AR accounts receivable.
Thank you.
To create a new source of capital for them, right? That's entirely separate and apart from the securitization mechanism that is contemplated by the Senate and the legislature generally. So that's an active docket. It's an application that was submitted to us by the utility. I can't sit here and tell you anything about what the PUC thinks about that application or what we're doing right now in our approach to it. That's an example of the line. It's very similar to a court proceeding where a complaint or other legal proceeding is initiated before a judge, and the judge it's not appropriate for the judge to talk about that case to the public or what the judge thinks or doesn't think prior to the decision being rendered. That you start to lose and erode the objectivity of the decision maker. So that's one bright line. It is we are kind of a strange entity in the fact that we do have some ability to do both, to preside over controversies and evidentiary proceedings, and at the same time to think proactively and even take some proactive measures where appropriate to try to preserve our foundational duty to serve the public interest and ensure the reliable and safe provision of these essential services to the public. So, I mean, when the coal plant was shutting down fairly quickly and there were not adequate resources on the grid to make us feel comfortable that everything was going to be okay on Oahu, this is before my time at the PUC, but the PUC decided to initiate a battery bonus program, and that was the PUC's proactive effort to bring more resources faster online through a diverse set of smaller batteries scattered throughout the islands. It only really started for Oahu and Maui, but that has been successful. Over 40 megawatts of capacity is already in the queue for that, and I think on any given day, HECO gets about 20 megawatts or so of support at peak from that policy, and even though it's not fully implemented, and that's increasing every single day, because those little systems are adding on every single day. And it may get up to a total of 45 megawatts on Oahu by the time it's all done. And on Maui, I think it's 15 megawatts is what's been called for. And I've heard some rumors that maybe something like that might be appropriate for the Big Island as well. But we haven't received any applications from the utility on that yet. But that was an example of something we did proactively. So in terms of how to signal to the legislature, whether, I don't know. I mean, I have only been at the PUC for 17 months. I'm not sure I have a perfect understanding of exactly how that relationship could be most effective. But I feel like it's appropriate for the legislature to bring up any issues that
Well, I guess the question
need to be dealt
an
with.
attempt to is to look inside your mind. And 17 months is more than enough time to understand that the public and HECO and the other utilities and the transportation guys that have business before your commission and the legislature, we're all trying to there's a tug and pull. We're all trying to push you to do this and that. And there is a line where one or all of us as entities, if we get our way, can eventually move beyond what's appropriate and co-opt the PUC into some sort of prerogative. And so I'm trying to understand for you where the boundary is. Because if you just let us keep passing laws telling you how you need to rule, then eventually we'll write laws in a circle and you'll be the energy. You'll have nowhere to go. And that can't, and to Senator McKelvey's point, that just cannot happen as a regulator. You cannot allow outside stakeholders to do that, whether it's the one chamber or committee of the legislature, or whether it's organized entities in the public who actively engage your dockets. Right.
So I agree. I don't think the legislature should tell us how to rule on things or should set parameters for a new mechanism so narrowly that the outcome is predetermined. I do think that the PUC should, I would ask the legislature when it's passing laws relating to the PUC that it's still.
Well, so we may if you let us. What the question again is for you, what is your boundary? How do you approach this balance?
Maintaining independence.
What are the guardrails?
Yeah, I mean, that's sort of the fundamental one is letting us continue to be independent. If you tell us to consider something or consider a new mechanism, at least allow us to decide at the end of the day whether we want to agree to it or not. Don't tell us that we have to. You can create new tools for us to look at and consider, and there are a number of new tools that may
Well, so
very well
again,
be
I'm not
appropriate.
asking you to ask us. I'm
Yeah.
asking you to articulate what your standard is for when an outside entity has pushed too far on requests for the PUC to be proactive in facilitating something in the public interest.
Don't try to turn us into a planning agency. We're not a planning agency. We don't have that overarching role. And don't do things that erode our independent decision-making process or constrain us and force us to make decisions within an unrealistic timeframe. I think a number of testimony we provided to certain measures, and they've been amended and they've been changed throughout this session, were initially trying to get us to make very quick decisions in certain areas, and I can't remember all of them at this point, but we pushed back on that immediately and said we can't do it within that time frame. We can't give you a report some of them were asking for reports by the end of this year on certain very large, complicated issues, and we pushed back and said we can't do that. So, I mean, we're going to stick up for ourselves in our responses and our testimony in responses to legislation that affects us. I think we've been doing that. I think we've been explaining where the line is in that testimony. And I agree with the testimony we've submitted on the various measures. Don't put us in a box. And the other thing is, I mean, try to avoid unfunded mandates. We have a very small budget right now. The budget we should probably find ways to increase our resources, somewhat significantly over the next few years. California, in response to its wildfire disasters, wound up substantially increasing certain parts of the PUC and making it a more robust player in keeping the public safe. Whether that is exactly the right answer for the Hawaii PUC, I can't tell you sitting here today, but it should be considered, and we should, as we all know, have more state resources dedicated to safety and reliability of our grids. Like, we're going to move forward with the HERA, the Hawaii Electric Reliability Administrator concept. No matter what, we're going to institute new surcharges that aren't going to be overly burdensome on ratepayers, but they are going to make a difference in terms of giving us a little more money to help improve reliability standards, to actually create an official HERA within our regulatory structure. And I think that'll be useful, but we also need to bolster our compliance section. We need more people out there physically looking at infrastructure, giving us insight. If the measure that would transfer enforcement responsibility of the motor carrier laws, if that gets transferred to DOT, Department of Transportation, we're in favor of that because it'll free up some of our compliance people to be retrained and do more electrical infrastructure inspections and compliance work.
Okay. Thank you. Senator Lee.
Thanks, just one. Just switching gears just a little bit. PUC regulates both the electricity sector plus all the inter-island transportation, other sorts of stuff. But we're approaching a period in the relatively immediate future where we're going to have sort of a crossover where you have electrified transportation options moving between the islands with the sea glider folks and other advanced air mobility and vertical takeoff and landing and all that sort of thing, which are commercializing, sort of around the country and elsewhere as we speak. That's going to require a lot more load on the grid, but presumably, but also has the potential to reduce inter-island transportation by all accounts by as much as a third. But in the PUC's regulation of both of those different sectors, now that there's going to be a significant amount of overlap, is there anything you foresee needing to change at the PUC, or how do you think about that?
Generally, HECO is forecasting load growth of 75 to 100% in the next 15 years, I think. I may not have that time frame precisely right. I don't think that they are considering yet load coming from that type of resource, but they would have to. I think they're mostly focused on electric vehicles, cars, and air conditioning increases. So we've got to anticipate loads like that if they're really coming and they're really going to become substantial, then getting as much advance notice as possible that of when that type of load might come into existence would be really useful, I think, for everybody. And then I don't know whether or not it may overlap with what Young Brothers does or not. I mean, Young Brothers is the only inter-island carrier that we regulate, and they have a monopoly right now on that provision of good distribution between the islands, basically. I mean, there's some air cargo stuff going on, but we don't regulate the current air cargo transfer of goods between islands. Right? That's not within our purview. So depending on how what you're talking about is structured, it might not fall under our regulation either.
I guess I'm just asking because you regulate inter-island rates for stuff as well as rates for electricity.
Right.
And if the two of those are intertwined in a significant way, I guess what I'm asking is there any challenge you guys face, or is it business as usual? Or do both those things align in a way that doesn't cause you any sort of unanticipated conflicts?
I'm sure that would cause some new challenges. I don't know exactly what they would be. I think getting more information and more kind of advance notice of what's likely to come would be helpful. But I don't think I can fully respond to the question, unfortunately.
Okay, thank you, Chair.
Members, any other questions?
Just the last
Senator
thing, I just
McKelvey.
want to thank you for drawing that bright line, because, to me, I mean, I think there is a need for the state. This is my view, this evolved, I guess, recently in the last few months. The state needs to be more of an active player, planning entity, if you will, through the Office of Energy to help create basically a system whereby planning and acquisition of generation is being done in the public interest. Because, the utility always, even despite their best interests, are going to have rose-colored glasses towards that. And so you have independent plans on what's in the best public interest and for the county, the state, for future growth, everything for generation facilities, So knowing where your bright line is important if we try to, with the Office of Energy, engage in discussions about how can the Office of Energy start to look at being a more proactive in these areas. So I appreciate you doing, but that's the kind of, I guess, for me, the definitiveness that we need, so we can work cooperatively with them, the utilities, with the Office of Energy, with you guys, without pushing you into areas. And likewise, other entities could say, well, we can't do it, it's the PUC. See what I'm saying? That gray area also hurts you, because then other entities think it's you're pulling on. But I appreciate you, but we need you to hopefully establish more of those bright guardrails for policy purposes in all areas, to the co-chair's question. So thank you, Chair. That's my final question.
Members, any other questions? Okay, seeing none, we'll recess. Okay, welcome back. We are on decision making for Governor's Message 705 Colin Yost to the Public Utilities Commission. And we're prepared to make a recommendation to the Senate. I'd like to thank the nominee for making himself available and then waiting a week and making himself available again and engaging in a thorough and thoughtful conversation. I think you've done a great job of showing the committee that you approach things diligently and thoroughly and with an even temperament that I think is of value to the PUC. So the recommendation is to advise and consent to the nomination. Members, any comments or questions? Senator McKelvey.
No, I'm going to fully support the nomination. I mean, this discussion today was hugely important, not for us, but for the public. But I'm confident you're going to continue to help establish those bright lines, but also address the issues, that have been brought up, and stand up for the PUC, even when it's not. That's what struck me too. Even when it's not popular, I'm sure I'm going to get a lot of lickings from some environmental friends about the batteries. But the fact that we can have an honest, frank discussion about the data and the science, knowing that is heartening. So I think it's a great recommendation, Sharon. Thank you for allowing me to say that.
Members, any other discussion? Okay, seeing none, Chair votes aye.
Thank you. Vice Chair also votes aye. Senator McKelvey?
Yes, sir.
Senator Richards.
Aye.
Senator Awa is excused. Your recommendation is adopted.
Thank you, congratulations, and we are adjourned.